Chapter 1: The Weight of the Crown. The air in the High Alpha's stone chamber didn't just feel cold, it felt dead, like stone polished by centuries of hard, unforgiving judgments. Alpha Damian Varkos sat on his obsidian throne, the weight of the Shadowwood pact pressing down on him like a collapsing mountain. His face, usually a mask of stoic authority, was etched with a weariness that went bone deep. Truth be told, he found no joy in ruling anymore, only the heavy, endless obligation of keeping the peace. A thin, brittle piece of parchment lay on the table, the execution order for Elara Lyra. Counselor Warrant, an aging wolf whose silver fur only amplified his perpetual look of worry, stood before Damian. Not only that, Warrant's voice was a low, anxious rasp. "Alpha, the reports from the border are grim. The obsidian sex whispers are spreading like a fast-moving sickness through the younger ranks. They promise power. They promise chaos. We need stability, Damian. We need a clear show of force, because if we don't act now, they will tear us apart from the inside." Damian's eyes, the color of deep twilight, drifted back to the parchment. His initial goal was clear: maintain the absolute stability and security of his pack, even if it required brutal decisions. That was the cornerstone of his rule. It was his internal flaw. The needs of the many always outweighed the needs of the one, and a true leader must sacrifice personal morality for collective order. He felt a familiar, cold satisfaction in that logic. As a result, that detachment was what made him Alpha. He remembered a story his father, the previous Alpha, told him, the tale of the Silent Scourge, a time when a rival pack was slowly poisoned by a seemingly harmless lie. Still, his father always stressed that the appearance of justice was just as crucial as justice itself. What scared Damian most wasn't open war, but the subtle, creeping rot that the Obsidian sect excelled at, like a slow-motion drowning. Subplot/hook: what is the sect's full plan? Yet, signing Elara's death was a political move. She was framed, yes, but her death would silence the rumors and demonstrate swift, ruthless authority against perceived treason. Without another word, Damian picked up the heavy, silver-ink pen. The scratching sound echoed in the stone chamber like a fingernail on a slate. Just like that, he finished his signature. Damian Varkos. Execution confirmed. He looked at the signed document, a life ended by his hand. He felt nothing. Instead, he felt the cold satisfaction of order restored, a momentary illusion of control in a crumbling world. He handed the parchment to Warrant. "Make the arrangements." Dawn. The tension broke. Damian stood, towering over the aged counselor. He needed air, not because of the death warrant, but because the weight of his duty felt too heavy to carry. He knew, deep down, that today's justice would be tomorrow's regret, but then, a flicker of movement by the chamber door caught his eye, ushering in the next necessary act of governance. Chapter 2: The Confrontation and the Scent. Before she could move, the heavy oak doors of the chamber swung open, and the guards brought her in. Elara Lyra. She was small and slender, bound at the wrists with dull iron. She was dressed simply, but her presence was a defiant challenge to the oppressive stone room. Damian watched her eyes, terrified, yet holding a flicker of light that refused to be extinguished. It was like looking at a tiny, flickering candle flame in a massive, dark cavern. Damian positioned himself behind the carved, stone judge's bench. His goal was to maintain the cold, necessary judicial facade and conclude the political maneuver. He needed to be stoic, emotionally walled off, seeing her only as a necessary sacrifice for stability. He began reading the final sentencing from a separate, ritualistic scroll. His voice was a flat baritone, authoritative and emotionless. Elara Lyra, you have been found guilty of sedition against the Shadowwood Alpha. The punishment is death at dawn. As the silence stretched, Elara lifted her chin. Her voice, though soft, carried a clear, bell-like quality. I am innocent. You know this is a lie, Alpha Damian. You execute the truth to save yourself. Her defiance was a small punch to his chest. He pushed the flicker of annoyance down. Still, he couldn't let emotion sway the law. What's worse, her words echoed his own private, nagging doubt about the false charges. In that moment, as he pronounced the final word, it happened. The paradoxical scent of the bloodline struck him. It was not a smell, but a force, a pure, intoxicating essence that ripped through the cold, dead air of the chamber. It smelled like rain on dry earth, fire after a long winter, and a deep, ancient longing he hadn't known he possessed. His internal alpha command reeled. Mine. The word echoed in a forgotten part of his mind. It was a fated bond. The ultimate, undeniable sign of a soul match in their ancient werewolf mythology. Damian's blood ran cold. The woman he just sentenced to die was his mate. Because of that, his hands instinctively clenched on the heavy stone bench like granite clamping down on a secret. He violently shoved the sensation down, dismissing it with a brutal mental command. It's stressful. It's fantasy. It's the pressure of the sect. He was determined to believe that, even though deep down, he knew the truth. Open loop, what is the exact nature of this bloodline? As if pulled by a string, he quickly ended the proceeding. Guards, remove the prisoner. Counselor Vorn, dismissed. Despite that desperate command, the unique scent lingered in the heavy air, a sharp, unwelcome disruption to his perfect order. It was a sensory violation, and a flicker of self-doubt that maybe his duty was misplaced began to burn behind his eyes. He dismissed the court abruptly, needing to escape the sensory violation and the undeniable truth he felt. Meanwhile, the scent followed him, like a shadow refusing to leave the sunlight. Chapter 3: An Alpha's Restless Sleep. That night, the scent was an illness. Damian paced his private chambers, the stone floor cool beneath his bare feet. The lingering fragrance of jasmine, ancient magic, and her haunted his senses, which meant he couldn't think straight. His goal was simple: re-establish complete self-control and detachment before dawn. With every heartbeat, he fought the primal, animalistic pull that demanded he run to the dungeons and claim his mate. But then, he'd remember the Alpha Law, his vow, and the political necessity of her execution. His frustration boiled over because his rigid control was failing over a woman who was supposed to be a resolved political footnote. More importantly, this was more than just a mate bond, it was magical. He realized that because his body was fighting the scent as if it were a poison, it was confirmation that this was a force of fate his logic could not conquer. He began an agitated search of his ancestral library, a vast, dark room filled with the dust and secrets of centuries. He pulled obscure, leather-bound volumes, seeking a rational explanation for the disruption. He thought of his ancestors, the great warriors who founded Shadowwood. He remembered one story, the tale of the first betrayal, where an alpha sacrificed his mate's lineage for power. As the truth unraveled in the dusty pages, Damian sought legends, vague references to fated bloodlines protected by a forgotten oath. Yet, every mention was shrouded in myth and fear, hinting at power too great to control. He pulled a heavy, dust-caked volume from the highest shelf. It was the History of the Silent Ones, a book rarely touched. Because of that, when it slipped from his tired grasp and hit the floor with a heavy thud, the resulting cloud of dust felt like a physical slap of fate. Just like that, the book lay open to a strange, crumbling page bearing a unique, triangular seal. Between them, something cracked. Tucked inside was a brittle, hand-drawn map. It was older than the stone chamber itself, and its crude lines pointed to a spot directly beneath his desk. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just a strange coincidence, but then a whisper of the jasmine scent seemed to guide his eyes. He knelt, tracing the lines of the map with a trembling finger. This was not a rational explanation, this was the disruption he had been seeking. This was the moment his duty, defined by law, was about to be obliterated by a duty defined by blood. With every step he took toward his desk, the map felt heavier, its secret threatening to expose the lie he lived. He knew, with absolute certainty, that his simple, cold world of alpha law was about to be consumed by the fire of ancient history and a powerful, forbidden love. Chapter 4: The Ancestral Oath. Damian's fingers, usually steady as the stone throne he sat upon, trembled as he pried open the hidden floor panel beneath his desk. It wasn't just dust that rose, it was the scent of time itself, dry, metallic, and heavy with forgotten magic. Without warning, a rush of cold air hit his face, smelling faintly of sulfur and jasmine. He ignored the primitive terror that spiked his wolf instincts. He didn't know what scared him more, the thought of upholding a law that felt like a lie, or the fear of finding a truth that would expose him as a traitor. In the span of a breath, Damian shone his lantern into the narrow, dark alcove. Inside sat a small, iron-bound chest and a thick, rolled-up piece of parchment, the ancient pact scroll. Its leather was white with age, crisscrossed with runes that seemed to pulse with their own dim, internal light. He carefully lifted the scroll. As the truth unraveled, the words, written in the ancient tongue of the first alphas, burned into his mind, the reluctant guardian oath. Internal monologue/short pacing. He read the oath. No. Impossible. Betrayal. The law is the law. But the bloodline. The bloodline must be protected at all costs. His ancestors swore it. The scroll explicitly detailed the Alpha line's secret, sacred duty to protect this unique, powerful bloodline, Elara's bloodline, the very key the pack needed to survive. Because of that, the execution order he signed just hours ago was not just a political mistake, it was a direct betrayal of his deepest ancestral duty. What followed was a sickening realization that shattered his entire worldview. His initial flaw, a true leader must sacrifice personal morality for collective order, was utterly wrong, because adhering to the visible law now meant violating the secret law, which would ultimately destroy the pack. The moral dilemma was now absolute: uphold the current, rigid law, execution, and condemn his pack to the obsidian sect's slow rot, or uphold the ancient, secret oath, rescue, and become a fugitive traitor to his own rules. Maybe it was fate, maybe it was the haunting scent of jasmine on the scroll, but the choice became terrifyingly clear. Come morning, the rising sun began to cast a desperate orange glow through the chamber window, painting the dusty alcove with urgency. Time wasn't running out, time was screaming. Damian had to formulate a lethal plan, and he had to do it now, before the stone chamber claimed his mate and his soul. Chapter 5: The False Execution. The courtyard outside the High Alpha stone chamber buzzed with silent, heavy anticipation. The ritual pyre stood ready, a grim monument to Damian's cold justice. Meanwhile, Damian, outwardly calm and composed in his alpha leathers, orchestrated the public-facing execution ritual. His skin felt too tight, stretched over the raging internal terror of this monumental lie. Instead of leading the procession, Damian worked quickly in the hidden holding cell beneath the chamber. He used a bit of forbidden illusion magic, a rare skill known only to the Alpha line, to create a decoy, a perfect, silent duplicate of Elara. He worked without thinking, his hands moving on pure instinct. After that, he moved to the real Elara. She was still bound, still terrified, but her eyes, when she looked at him, were full of stunned confusion, which meant she didn't understand why the man who sentenced her to death was now hiding her. "Be silent," he whispered, his voice ragged with tension. "One sound, and we are both dead." He sealed her in a dark, makeshift storage area deep in the chamber's foundations. As the wind shifted above, Damian returned to the courtyard just in time for the execution to begin. He walked past Counselor Vorn, whose eyes looked too sharp, too interested in the final act. The moment their eyes locked, Damian felt a spike of paranoia. Vorn suspects something. Subplot/hook, is Vorn part of the sect, or just a suspicious loyalist? Damian stood before the council, watching the decoy led to the pyre. With every heartbeat, he felt the immediate, crushing weight of public condemnation. He was lying to protect them, yet he felt the bitter taste of betrayal because he was violating every principle he swore to uphold. The very people he was saving saw him as righteous, when in fact, he was a massive hypocrite. By the time the ceremonial blade was raised, Damian mentally snapped the illusion. The decoy vanished in a burst of smoke and light that only the trained eyes of the guards would dismiss as a magical effect of the justice. The climax of the scene was silent but devastating. He had chosen the secret path. He had chosen the oath. That's why the crushing weight of public condemnation, the silence of the relieved crowd, felt like the first nail in his coffin. As the echo faded, Damian dismissed the council with a curt wave, trying to ignore the eyes of suspicion that followed his every step. He had to reach the real Elara now, before the deception was discovered, and before his pack realized their alpha had just committed treason. Chapter 6: The Forced Threshold. Damian moved through the stone chamber's hidden passages like a shadow fleeing the light. He reached the small storage area where he had left Elara. The air was stale, close, and the faint, familiar jasmine scent was now thick with her fear. He yanked the iron grate open. Elara flinched, pulling back like a wild creature cornered. "Come," he commanded, his voice raw. "You're not safe here. Your life is still in danger. I'm taking you away." "Away?" Her voice trembled. "You signed my death warrant. Now you rescue me? What game is this, Alpha?" Before the words left her lips, Damian grabbed her arm, not gently, but with a necessary firmness. He didn't have time for explanations. "You have magic in your blood, Elara. Power they want to steal or destroy. I am bound by an ancient oath to protect that power. I don't need you to trust me, I need you to live." With a single glance into her wide, terrified eyes, he saw her confusion, but then he saw a tiny spark of understanding. She had always felt different, always carried the burden of the unknown. Not only that, the urgency became physical. Damian could feel the shift in the pack outside, the guards settling back into routine, Vorn likely already running diagnostics on the execution site. Time was not on their side. He physically pulled her through the low, hidden passage he had found the night before. Soon after, the passage opened into a vast, silent darkness. This was the Forgotten Catacombs of the First Pack. The space between them burned with the sheer force of their conflicting emotions, his desperate duty and her raw terror. He could feel her pulse racing under his hand as fire bloomed beneath her skin, a reflection of the unstable power now active within her. He pulled a lever hidden in the stone. Just like that, the heavy stone door of the catacombs sealed behind them with a terrible, grinding sound. Damian let go of Elara. He stood there, chest heaving, smelling the damp air, the ancient moss, and the overwhelming, volatile scent of uncontrollable magic. He was a fugitive from his own laws, bound to a woman he just condemned to death. His old life, the cold, pragmatic stability, was irreversibly over. The catacombs, dark and vast, became their new, chaotic world, and the true conflict had just begun. Chapter 7: The Asset and the Guardian. The air in the Forgotten Catacombs was wet and thick, smelling of limestone and millennia of undisturbed darkness. In the quiet that followed the sealing of the door, the only sound was the uneven rhythm of their breathing. Damian found a low, cold cavern, setting up a temporary camp. He didn't build a fire, the risk of smoke escaping was too great. He treated Elara like a fragile weapon, necessary, but terrifyingly unstable. His goal was to establish absolute control over this new, chaotic environment and maintain the emotional distance that defined his life. "You will stay close," he stated, his voice echoing oddly off the uneven stone. "You will not speak unless necessary. And you will not touch anything without my permission. We are fugitives, Elara. Not partners. You are the asset. I am the guardian." Her voice trembled. "The asset? You saved me, only to call me a thing?" Despite that, her fear was slowly giving way to a spark of outrage, which Damian found unsettling. She wasn't just terrified, she was defiant. Her thoughts spun: she didn't deserve to be treated like an object. Deep down, she knew the truth: Damian's internal flaw was visible in his every action. He was desperately trying to fit their explosive, fated bond into a safe, cold duty box. He was clinging to the laws he just broke. That's why he kept his distance, always watching, never touching. He needed to prove his control to himself, because if he lost control of her, he lost control of everything. Still, their silence was fractured by the occasional drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the darkness. He pointed to a large, sealed portion of the wall, covered in runes that shimmered faintly. "We start here. The lore. The rules of your power are in here. You need to understand your burden." As the silence roared, he realized she was staring at him, not the wall. "And you?" she asked, her voice softer now, more curious. "What does the scroll say about your burden? Do you have to sacrifice me, or just keep me cold?" Her question struck him like a sharp piece of ice. He ignored it. He was checking an ancient, crumbling seal near the floor. In that moment, as he brushed away the dust, he discovered the first clear, terrifying mention of the bloodline ritual. The text spoke of power, great power, but whispered of the cost of its magic, a vague but worrying reference to soul sacrifice. Her voice trembled again. "What did you find?" Before he could speak, he merely slammed the dusty book shut. The risk was greater than he knew. He had to keep searching, because the cost of this ancient power was clearly deadly. Chapter 8: First Glimmer of Power. Instead of letting her rest, Damian forced Elara to join him in translating the massive, complex runic wall. That's why they were side by side now, the heat of her body too close, his senses screaming with the unacknowledged mate scent. Focus on the syntax, Damian instructed, his voice low and intense. The language shifts from descriptive to declarative here. It's a warning, not a prophecy. Elara was struggling. No matter how hard she tried, the ancient language made her head ache. It's just noise, Damian, she complained, rubbing her temple. How am I supposed to read magic? I'm not a sorcerer, I'm a victim. You are more than that. Damian snapped. His instincts surged. You are the key to saving the pack. Act like it. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, a sudden frustration, mixed with the intense magic of the wall, overwhelmed her. Without thinking, she slammed her palm flat against the runic surface. Just like that, everything changed. A small, uncontrolled pulse of vivid, blue-white energy erupted from the wall, illuminated the vast tunnel, and then vanished. The pulse wasn't loud, but the feeling of it roared in Damian's mind, pure, raw, volatile magic. Elara gasped, stumbling backward, her eyes wide with shock. Damian's goal instantly shifted, understand the mechanism of her power and how to keep it dormant. He felt alarmed, but also a professional curiosity that quickly overcame the primal fear. Because of that, he was forced to work with her, not just for her, slowly eroding his detached facade. What was that? Elara whispered, her voice laced with terror. I didn't mean to. Control, Damian cut in, his voice softer now, less alpha, more teacher. It was an uncontrolled release. You are not a victim, Elara. You are an unstable furnace. You need to learn how to seal the magic, or it will consume you. By the time the initial shock wore off, Elara looked at the wall with a strange, new intensity. She had been passive, but now she was an active participant. She realized the burden of her power. Meanwhile, the small burst of light had activated something, a low, grinding sound from the tunnel ceiling. A beat later, a minor rockfall cascaded down, blocking the main path leading deeper into the catacombs. It was a minor obstacle, but then Damian felt the distinct, sickening tremor of a larger force on the surface. The obsidian sect was moving. The rockfall had given away their general location to anyone monitoring the pact's movements. They were not safe. The air thickened with danger. Chapter 9: The Antagonist's First Move. As the sky darkened over the distant chasm section of the catacombs, Damian was running reconnaissance. What followed was the sharp, acrid smell of ozone and wet metal, not ancient magic, but the scent of freshly forged power. Without warning, a highly skilled scouting party from the Obsidian sect intercepted them. They emerged from the shadows like predators, confirming Damian's worst fear: the execution was a lie, and they were hunting them with purpose. Damian pushed Elara behind a massive granite pillar. His goal was simple: eliminate the threat without letting them call for reinforcements. His emotional state was pure, instinctive alpha rage/defense. As if summoned, his fighting stance was no longer the formal, measured style of the revered alpha, but the brutal, guerrilla tactics of a cornered fugitive. Where is the traitor alpha? The lead scout, a hulking male with eyes too cold, snarled. The order stands. The girl dies. Because of that, the fight was short and vicious. Damian fought outside the law for the first time in his life, using stealth, surprise, and bone-shattering efficiency. He broke the lead scout's arm instead of merely subduing him, which meant the message was clear: they were fighting for survival, not justice. In the echo of his voice, the scout screamed. Moments later, the fighting was over. Damian stood over the bodies, his lungs burning, the metallic tang of blood filling the air. He recognized the markings and tactics. They were elite guards, trained by his own command structure. Political infiltration was confirmed. The enemy wasn't some outside threat, but wolves he had likely overseen himself. Even so, the sight of the dead wolves brought a crushing clarity. His sacrifice of his old life was necessary, but then the threat became terrifyingly personal. He turned back to Elara. She was pale, but her eyes weren't fixed on the bodies, they were fixed on her own arm. As the bond pulsed between them, Damian looked too. The unique, beautiful markings on Elara's forearm, the ancient symbol of her bloodline, faintly glowed in the low light. With his scent in the air, Damian realized the final, chilling truth. The threat wasn't just external infiltration or some grand political scheme. The threat was her power, and that power was the exact thing that attracted the Obsidian sect. The key to the pact's survival was the source of their pursuit. The problem wasn't the pact's law, it was the fate Damian had been trying to outrun. Just like that, everything changed. The threat is not external, it is her. Chapter 10, The Paradox Revealed. As the bond pulsed with terrifying urgency, Damian forced Elara deeper into the catacombs, away from the dead scouts. The air thickened with the scent of their shared fear and the overwhelming fragrance of jasmine. That night, they reached a section Damian hadn't known existed, an inner shrine, small, dark, and carved with the full prophecy. The stone wasn't cold here, it hummed with latent power. Instead of resting, Damian spent a sleepless night, poring over the codes. His goal was desperate: find a loophole in the ancient text. He was looking for any way to use the pact-saving power without the fatal choice. What followed was a dizzying, frantic translation. The prophecy described the final ritual like a terrifying ledger. Not only that, the text explained the final twist: the ritual must involve a sacrifice. The bloodline's magic was too vast for one person to channel without an anchor. The moment their eyes locked across the room, Damian understood the impossible choices. Choice 1, death, for the pact's power. Elara sacrifices her life, the energy anchors to her death, and the power stabilizes the pact. Choice 2, soul binding, for the guardian. The guardian, Damian, willingly binds his soul to her, the energy anchors to their eternal connection, and the power stabilizes the pact. Because of that, the conflict was now fully internalized: duty versus fate/love. He looked at Elara, sleeping fitfully across the chamber, and felt a strange, dark sense of desire at the thought of the soul binding. He saw that the pact's survival required a loss he was no longer willing to accept. His pragmatic mind could not solve this magical, emotional problem. He paced, running his hands through his hair. He didn't know what scared him more, the thought of losing her, or the terrifying thought of being bound to her forever. But then, a loud, distant tremor shook the catacombs, rattling the ancient bones and dust around them. Her world tilted. The Obsidian sect wasn't waiting. They were causing chaos on the surface, which meant the immediate use of the ritual was now necessary. He had to stop searching for loopholes and start making a lethal decision. Chapter 11, The Midpoint Shift, Crushing Defeat. Come morning, the tremors intensified. Damian managed to intercept a coded communication using an old alpha transmission device hidden in the shrine. In the quiet that followed the static, the message was devastating. The key event, the midpoint shift. The Obsidian sect had successfully framed and captured Captain Rian, a loyal officer and one of Damian's few remaining internal supporters. Just like that, Rian was exposed as a traitor, crippling Damian's internal support and making the pact critically vulnerable to the sect's next move. Damian's emotional state was crushing defeat and rage. His goal was immediately changed: initiate the ritual now to stop the sect's momentum, because his former rigidity and delay had just cost an innocent life. He turned to Elara, who was watching him with wide, fearful eyes. The mask of the rigid alpha finally cracked. Between them, something cracked. "I was wrong," he choked out, the admission tasting like ash. "I was so focused on the law, on the duty, that I sentenced you to death. I let them take Rian." His voice trembled. "I thought cold logic was strength, but it was just fear. My cold duty failed. The point of no return was reached. The magic was an immediate, deadly necessity." As if fate demanded it, he walked towards her, the scent bond now roaring in his ears. "I want the soul binding, Elara," he confessed, his voice a low growl. "I want that power to anchor us. I want it to anchor to my regret for what I did to you, and to the truth of this bond." As her wolf stirred, Elara didn't flee. Her fear receded, replaced by a stunning, newfound determination. She felt it, clear as day, the power surging not from the ritual, but from his confession. She walked to the rune wall and touched the cold stone, claiming the magic. "I will do it," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. "But I am not an asset for your duty. I am your partner. We do this together, Alpha. As equals." Chapter 12, New Resolve and a Desperate Call. As the air thickened with their mutual resolve, Damian nodded sharply. The tension broke. He would work with her. He felt focused, driven by both duty and personal connection, a terrifying, exhilarating blend of new growth. Together, they formulated the next move. Elara began the intensive study of the ritual's exact physical steps, her eyes scanning the codes with fresh insight. Meanwhile, Damian returned to the alpha transmission device. He didn't know what scared him more, the thought of the soul binding, or the possibility that his message would be intercepted. Nevertheless, he sent a final, highly risky coded message to the handful of loyal, uncompromised pack members left. "This is Alpha Varkos," he transmitted, keeping his voice dangerously low. "Elara Lyra is alive. The Obsidian sect leader is Counselor Vorn." What followed was the sound of the message being sent, a sound that felt like setting fire to his last bridge. Because of that, the act was the true embodiment of his shift from rigid, detached ruler to a trusting guardian. He risked his last chance for support by naming the traitor, but it was necessary to give his allies a fighting chance. With a single glance at Elara, he knew the war for the pack and the fight for her soul were now fully merged. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the increasing closeness accelerated the faded scent bond between them to a nearly overwhelming degree. It was no longer an annoyance, it was a necessary power source. In the stillness that followed, they packed their meager supplies. The destination was clear, the ultimate ritual site. They were fully committed to the soul binding, accepting the consequences. The enemy was closing in fast, and the point of no return was far behind them. Next, their commitment would be tested by the escalating tactics of the traitor Alpha, Counselor Vorn. Chapter 13, The Confession and the Risk. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Elara worked the ritual codes, the scent bond between them accelerating, pulling their emotions into a single, terrifying stream. Her thoughts spun with the possibilities of her power, yet she kept coming back to Damian's confession, his shame over signing the death warrant. That night, Damian found himself unable to sleep, unable to remain silent. He didn't know what scared him more, the fear of dying in the ritual, or the fear of failing the ancestral oath again. He needed to share the terrifying clarity that now drove him. "When I signed that order," Damian confessed, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, "I felt nothing. That's how I ruled. Now, the thought of losing you, it is a physical agony. This is no longer just duty, Elara. It is love. And that fear makes the duty heavier." Her voice trembled as she reached for his hand. "I know. When I thought I was going to die, my only regret wasn't the pact. It was that I never got to know the Alpha who saw past the executioner's mask. The space between them burned. We are violating everything the pact stands for, because of this bond. Are we sure we can trust it?" In the stillness that followed, Damian made his ultimate commitment. He sent a final, complex-coded message to his last loyalists, the ones who escaped Vorn's ambush. He instructed them to gather resources, secure the ritual components, and prepare for a direct assault on the temple. "I will violate every pact tradition if necessary to protect Elara," he transmitted. Because of that, his words were a final, conscious step away from his former, rigid self. He was driven by a terrifying new clarity. The law was secondary to the fate that saved the pact. Without another word, he looked at Elara, whose magical activation was now causing faint blue light to pulse on the catacombs' atmosphere. The unique scent now bound them with an almost physical intensity, fueling their focus. As the bond pulsed, they knew their path was set, and the risk was everything. Chapter 14, The Escalation at the Pass. Meanwhile, the antagonist, Counselor Vorn, was not idle. Vorn's ruthless logic was simple: disrupt Damian's allies and prevent the soul binding, because the combined power of a fated bond was too great a threat to his absolute control. Moments later, as Damian and Elara moved through a narrow, collapsing canyon, a key pass leading to the surface, the ambush began. Vorn's shock troops, wearing the black obsidian insignia, emerged from the high ledges. They were trained to intercept Damian's loyalists who were supposed to meet them. Damian's goal was dual: ensure his loyalists breached the pass and keep Elara safe from her own unstable power. He felt terrified and awestruck as the fight began. The fighting was chaotic in close quarters. Damian moved like lightning and fury in the dark, but the Obsidian sect was disciplined. One massive beta lunged, a blade aimed for Damian's throat. But then, before Damian could react, Elara's nascent magic flared uncontrollably. A blinding white surge of energy erupted from her, not targeted like a weapon, but like a shield of pure light. It slammed into the beta, throwing him against the stone wall with a sickening crack. "I didn't mean to," Elara cried out, her breath catching. Because of that, the raw, lethal power of the bond became immediately real. Damian saw her strength, and he let it happen. This was the first time Elara was truly active in combat, and it forced him to fully trust her power and judgment. His need for soul control eroded further. By the time the remaining attackers retreated, Damian felt the familiar sting of defeat. They had lost ground. But instead of focusing on the failure, he saw only Elara, shaking, but unbroken. As the echo faded, a chilling laugh boomed from a high ridge. The sect leader appeared briefly. It wasn't Vorn, but a younger, colder lieutenant who relayed the final threat. Counselor Vorn sends his regards, Alpha. The soul binding is an abomination. We will capture the girl to prevent the abomination. The final journey had to begin now. The stakes were not just survival, they were theological. Chapter 15, The Final Journey. Despite that chilling threat, the urgency of their mission pulled them forward. With every step he took, Damian moved them toward the temple of the first Alpha, the heart of the catacombs and the ritual site. As the bond pulsed with mutual determination, the emotional and magical tension between them became explosive. They could read each other's fear and determination almost perfectly, a constant hum of awareness that replaced the need for words. Elara's instincts surged. They know that binding is our goal. They'll be waiting at the temple. Let them wait, Damian growled. His goal was simple: reach the temple and prepare the ancient altar. He felt highly focused, driven by intimate desperation. He was balancing the tactical needs of the war with the terrifying reality of the bond they were about to forge. He shared a profound, nonverbal moment of understanding and resolve with Elara. They committed to the soul-binding option over death. They both knew this was the last moment of them before their lives, or deaths, were irrevocably decided by the ancient magic. After that, they reached the temple's final, enormous gate, a massive circle of carved stone. As if pulled by a string, Damian applied a learned pressure to a hidden seam. In the span of a breath, the stone gate groaned open. What followed was a wave of hot, strange, processed air. The antagonist was already inside, likely running tests or setting traps. They saw the ancient, imposing altar standing in the center of the vast chamber. But then, Damian noticed a detail that made his blood run cold. A vital protective rune carved near the altar, the Guardian's Anchor rune, had been partially desecrated. Someone had tried to corrupt its power. Her world tilted. They're ahead of us. They haven't just prepared for us, they've prepared for the ritual itself. As the silence roared, Damian understood. Vorn hadn't just come to stop them, he had come to hijack the ritual, forcing the death option, because he couldn't risk the power of their eternal bond. The final confrontation was no longer just a fight, it was a race to purify the sacred space before Vorn could trigger the killing blow. Chapter 16, The Ambush and the Shattered Command. As the bond pulsed with mutual determination inside the temple, Damian was frantically assessing the damage to the Anchor rune. Meanwhile, he received a final, devastating radio call from the surface. The signal was weak, filled with static and panic. Alpha, we're surrounded. It was Vorn, he trapped the rendezvous point. He's claiming treason, saying you're a usurper. The council, they're denouncing you publicly. The voice of his last loyal captain cut out with a sound like tearing metal. Silence. Damian's emotional state was numb shock. His goal was to ignore the surface chaos and focus only on protecting Elara, yet the realization that his entire legacy and authority was gone hit him like a physical blow. His thoughts spun with the crushing knowledge that the antagonist's political framing had worked perfectly. His allies were ambushed and scattered. The stone chamber he had dedicated his life to was now controlled by the enemy. Because of that, the external conflict was lost before the climax could even begin. He had sacrificed his power, his reputation, and his pack unity, the very things his rigid flaw was built to protect, all in vain, as the danger was still right here. His former methods had failed utterly. She felt it, clear as day, the despair that radiated from him. Elara reached out, her hand brushing his arm. In that moment, he saw not the asset, but the reason he had sacrificed everything. But then, before either could speak, the temple floor shuddered violently. A sudden, powerful magical explosion ripped through the air nearby. Vorn wasn't just working the surface, he was down here. The air thickened with the stench of ozone and dark magic. What followed was the crushing certainty that Vorn had successfully made a preemptive move within the temple. The enemy was ready. Chapter 17, The Trap and the Loss. As if pulled by a string, Damian and Elara rushed toward the source of the blast, a side chamber where Vorn must have initiated a counter-ritual. Without warning, they were caught in a brilliant, calculated trap. Runes etched into the floor, previously invisible, flared bright red. A powerful, ancient force slammed into Damian, throwing him back against the wall. The tension broke. He realized the antagonist leader was standing there, not Vorn, but a masked figure positioned next to the desecrated anchor rune. The masked figure was wielding a piece of the rune, using it to block Damian's alpha strength. Damian's goal became primal: reach Elara and break the magical blockage. His emotional state was white-hot fury, primal fear. He was stripped of his natural dominance and forced to fight purely on desperation. "Your duty failed you, Alpha," the masked figure sneered, his voice distorted. "The old laws are weak. The power belongs to the sect." As the silence roared in his ears, Damian saw the masked figure grab Elara. She fought like a cornered animal, screaming. In a desperate, final surge, Elara unleashed a devastating burst of uncontrollable raw power to save Damian from a shadow bolt. The force shielded him, but then the effort left her critically weakened, collapsing her defenses. Vorn, for it was Vorn, shedding his masked disguise, smiled, a cruel, triumphant expression. He easily captured the weakened Elara, dragging her toward the altar in the main chamber. "Now your bloodline pays the price," Vorn hissed, pulling her from the room. He let it happen. Damian was left stunned, magically paralyzed by the residual force of the trap. He watched, helpless, as his mate was dragged away. He felt it, clear as day, the raw, physical pain of their bond stretching and snapping as she disappeared. Chapter 18, The Dark Night of the Soul. Slowly, painfully, Damian broke free of the magical residue. He was alone in the ruined antechamber, bruised, defeated, and with the faint, fading echo of Elara's jasmine scent. The ritual was about to begin without him. His emotional state was utter despair, consumed by guilt. His goal was gone. He looked at his shaking hands, realizing the ultimate price of his rigidity. He failed to save the one person who could have saved the many, because he treated his heart, the scent, the bond, as a weakness for too long. His internal flaw was utterly destroyed. He had lost his power, his pack, his mate, and his self-respect. There was no law, no pack left, only the ghost of a faded love he couldn't grasp. Deep down, he knew the truth: detachment equals failure. But then, a tiny, brittle fragment of the ancient pact scroll, the one that defined his sacred duty, fluttered down from a high ledge, landing near his foot. He numbly picked it up. With a single glance, his eyes fell on a phrase: "The Guardian's final strength lies in sacrifice." As the truth unraveled, he found a desperate resolve. He still had one thing left to give, the thing he had spent his life hoarding, his life. He would face Vorn, not to win the pack back, but to save Elara's soul by fulfilling the Guardian's highest, most selfless duty. That's why he knew he had to find the secret instruction hidden in the scroll. Next, he would prepare to fight the final battle as a man giving his life for love, not as an alpha trying to uphold the law. Chapter 19, The Sacrifice of the Self. As the truth unraveled from the scroll fragment in his hand, Damian no longer saw the dusty chamber, he saw the future, a final act of selfless duty. He felt a renewed, singular focus. He realized the ultimate price was acceptance. He had fought the bond, the prophecy, and the chaos. Now, he would embrace it. In the quiet that followed, he studied the cryptic final instruction on the brittle paper. It detailed the Guardian's selfless action, a ritual key that must be initiated from his side of the bond, requiring a fatal commitment. Because of that, his death would be the catalyst, the spark that gave Elara's soul the stability to channel the power. "It is my turn to be the sacrifice," he whispered, the words a silent oath. His goal was no longer to win, but to sacrifice himself to save Elara. He was driven by a terrifying new clarity. He was no longer fighting for the pack or for the law, but for Elara. He accepted that his death was the necessary cost, which meant he was finally free of his own iron rules. His perspective shifted entirely from cold duty to love and sacrifice. Without another word, he moved to the hidden supply cache in the antechamber. He quickly used his remaining skill to modify his alpha armor, incorporating a tiny sliver of the scroll's runic knowledge into the metal. It was a single-use amplifier, designed to deliver a devastating charge, a final, suicidal surge. The tension broke with his resolve. That's why his former fears vanished, replaced by a cold certainty. He would walk toward the altar with the confidence of a man who had already chosen his ending. Next, he needed intelligence. Chapter 20, Gathering the Scattered Pieces. Instead of moving immediately to the main chamber, Damian followed a faint sign, a specific, pack-only scent of fear and smoke, to a lower passage. He found a shell-shocked loyalist huddled in the shadows, Captain Jax, who had escaped Vorn's ambush. With every heartbeat, Jax flinched. He expected the Alpha to punish him for desertion. But then, Damian merely knelt, his tone stripped of authority. "I am no longer the Alpha you knew, Captain," Damian said, the humility in his voice a stark contrast to his past. "Elara is alive. Vorn has her. The pack's survival requires a sacrifice. I need the truth." Jax's fear melted into stunned loyalty. He felt it, clear as day, the shift in his leader. Jax provided a critical piece of intelligence. The Obsidian sect had positioned its elite guards in a triangular formation around the altar, their eyes focused on the single entry door, because Vorn wanted to ensure maximum spectacle and control. Damian's goal was to use this intel to formulate a final, suicidal plan of attack. He felt cold resolve, zero fear. He was focused entirely on the immediate tactical objective, reaching the altar and triggering the key. As a result, he changed his plan. He wouldn't use the door. He would use the ventilation shafts Jax knew about, emerging directly above the altar. Not only that, he entrusted Jax with a final, desperate task, to secure the main entrance, creating a momentary diversion when Damian gave the signal. As the bond pulsed, Jax nodded, tears welling in his eyes. He let it happen, accepting the impossible mission. Damian, accepting help and delegating trust, demonstrated his final, mature form of leadership. Chapter 21, The Race to the Altar. As if the world narrowed to the sound of Vorn's voice, Damian launched his desperate, high-speed infiltration through the suffocatingly tight, dusty ventilation shafts. He moved like liquid shadow, his modified armor scraping against the stone. The air thickened with Vorn's booming incantations, which echoed through the shafts like a hammer pounding a nail. Vorn's voice, "The time is now. The bloodline power is ours. Let the sacrifice begin." Elara's faint, pain-filled cries reached Damian through the bond, fueling his progress like a blast of pure adrenaline. He felt primal, unstoppable urgency. He was driven by one certainty: every second he delayed was a second closer to the death option. Because of that, he had to interrupt the ritual while simultaneously preparing for the risk that his action might trigger the death fate instead of the binding. He reached the end of the shaft. It opened onto a high, narrow ledge directly above the temple floor. Below, Elara was bound on the ancient, cold altar. Vorn stood over her, his eyes blazing with mad power. He held a final, glowing symbol, the desecrated anchor rune piece. With his scent in the air, Damian gave the signal. Captain Jax's muffled blast at the main entrance was a tiny, useful distraction. Without warning, Damian kicked through the crumbling stone of the vent. He fell like a meteor into the chamber, landing directly between Vorn and the altar. The space between them burned. Vorn's head snapped up, his smile vanishing into pure alpha rage. Damian's chest ached with the intensity of his commitment. Next, the final, necessary sacrifice. Chapter 22, The Climax. As if the world narrowed, Damian slammed down onto the cold temple stone. The space between them burned with fury and power. Vorn, the traitor Alpha, roared, abandoning the ritual to face his fallen leader. Damian's goal was simple now: sacrifice himself to save Elara. He felt peak intensity, complete love and surrender. He answered the core question of his arc: love conquers law. Without warning, Vorn attacked, a flash of obsidian magic aimed at Damian's heart. What followed was a vicious, desperate magical and physical confrontation. Damian knew he couldn't win the physical fight. Vorn had corrupted the temple's power. Instead, Damian used his modified armor and the last ounce of his strength. As the bond pulsed between him and Elara, he activated the final key from the broken scroll. He didn't fight to live, he fought to trigger the bond. With a single glance at Elara, bound and terrified on the altar, he focused all his remaining will, sending a mental wave of absolute, undeniable commitment to their shared fate. Mine. Forever. As the bond pulsed, Elara sensed Damian's ultimate self-sacrifice through their connection. Her soul answered. She used her own terrifying will to harness the volatile magic of the temple, channeling the energy into the bond Damian had just initiated. The surge crested. A blinding wave of unified power, not Vorn's dark, corrupted magic, but the pure, ancient force of their combined destiny, exploded outward. As the echo faded, Vorn was instantly overwhelmed, screaming as the channeled, unified power destroyed him utterly, turning him to dust. Time stood still. Damian, expecting death, felt only exhaustion. The surge vanished, leaving silence and the profound, immediate realization that his senses were now completely integrated with Elara's. The bond held true, binding their souls forever. Chapter 23, Falling Action. A silence descended. Damian, weak but alive, stumbled to the altar. He felt profound relief, exhaustion, and an overwhelming connection that felt both intimate and terrifying. He quickly unbinds Elara. Her breath caught. "Damian, you're alive. We did it. We are bound," he whispered, the words carrying a resonance that went deeper than sound. They looked at each other with a terrifying, absolute clarity. There was no privacy left, they were one consciousness, two bodies. Not only that, the cost was paid, and the highest possible reward, the soul binding, was achieved, confirming their fate. Moments later, Captain Jax, dusty and bruised, entered the chamber through the main entrance he had breached. He stared at the dust pile that had been Vorn, then at Damian and Elara, who stood unnaturally close. "Jax, Alpha, what? What happened? Vorn is gone?" "Damian, Vorn is dealt with. The danger is contained. But the pack is vulnerable. Because of that, they couldn't stay." Without another word, Damian sent a final, highly charged, coded message to the remaining loyal pack council members. He reported the true events, the existence of the ancient pact, and the devastating truth about Vorn. The message was now magically underscored by the power of the bond, making his words irrefutable. Next, they prepared to face the consequences of their choice, together. Chapter 24: Falling Action. By the time Damian and Elara returned to the High Alpha Stone Chamber, the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, not condemnation. They walked in, not to face trial, but to address the remaining pack leaders. Elara's calm strength was evident through the bond. Damian spoke, his voice no longer cold, but tempered with certainty and compassion. He narrated the ancient oath, the sex corruption, and the ultimate, necessary sacrifice of his former self. He felt peaceful acceptance, humility. He had evolved from a lone ruler to a shared guardian. "Damian, I sentenced this woman to death because I trusted only the law. I almost destroyed us all. Vorn trusted only power. We survived only because we trusted the fated bond. The pack is rebuilt not on fear, but on the truth of this connection." As the bond pulsed, Elara nodded, affirming his words with her spirit. That's why his new rule prioritized justice tempered by compassion, integrating the ancient lore with modern law. He looked at the obsidian chair where he had signed the death warrant. He felt it, clear as day, no regret, only gratitude for the fate that had shattered his rigid self. His transformation was complete. Epilogue scene. 3 months later. The stone chamber had changed. It was still formidable, yet softened to reflect their dual rule, glowing runes of the bond now etched into the walls, light replacing darkness. Damian sat at the council table, reading a new decree regarding border security. Her heart skipped a beat in his mind, a slight mental disagreement. "Elara, through the bond, too harsh, my love. It punishes fear, not malice." Damian smiled, the act feeling natural and easy now. He amended the decree, softening the punitive action. As if the world narrowed to their shared understanding, he signed the paper. He no longer relies on law alone, but on law harmonized with shared purpose. With every heartbeat, he knew the truth: they were stronger, safer, and infinitely happier, bound by destiny.